Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We're visiting with Paul Johnson from Canton First Friends Church. Good morning.
Good morning.
And you have the neatest idea for a conference coming up, Grandparenting Matters. First of all, yes, it does. And second of all, how'd this idea come about?
Well, I was given the responsibility of senior adults at First Friends about a year and a half ago. And so as part of that, we began talking about grandparenting. And we had a person come in to give direction to our church, looking for a new vision and basically concentrating on family, a vision of heart, home, and world. Transform the heart, transform the home, and then transform the world. And out of that vision, we began, obviously, the church, I think, does a great job at looking at transforming the heart, but then how does that carry into the home? And we began to look at the home, and this person who came in shared part of the home is the extended family, which includes grandparenting. And because my responsibility was senior adults, that resonated with me. And so he told me about the first ever national grandparenting conference was being held in Dallas in November of last year. So myself and a coworker made a decision. The church sent us, and we went there for 4 days to Dallas, and you can drive forever in Dallas.
That is true.
You can drive forever just in the airport in Dallas.
It's true, too.
But we finally got to where it was. It was at Chuck Swindoll's church.
Oh, wow.
And so Chuck Swindoll is also a grandparent, so that resonated with him. So he hosted it. And the leader of this movement is Larry Fowler and Wayne Rice, and these two guys are well known.
I know their names from earlier.
Yes.
Remind me how.
Well, Larry Fowler is a mover and shaker in the Awana organization, and so he developed a lot of children's ministry curriculum and things like that. And Wayne Rice is like the pastor to youth pastors.
Yes.
He is the one who really speaks into developing and mentoring youth ministries.
So I'm going to guess that they are now grandparents?
You know what? It happens to all of us, doesn't it?
If you're lucky.
We get old, and they became grandparents, and suddenly they realized there was so little information and resources available to grandparents to how to be godly grandparents, and not just being godly grandparents. That's just part of the heart formation. It is how do we transmit our faith to our children's children?
Yes.
And so,
working with the parents,
because it's different. It's different than just transmitting it to your children, because you have final authority in your children. But now there is a layer in between, and that layer has authority over their children. And so how do we work? And there's all sorts of paradigms. I mean, there's all sorts of situations, either distance. How do we deal with grandparenting at a distance? Or how do we deal with transmitting our faith when our children don't live out their faith?
That was my very next question. I know folks who raised their children really teaching them about the love of God, the love of Jesus, and somehow or other the children have swerved away from that. Now they are still holding on to that promise that when they're old they will not depart from it, because they raised them up in the way which they should go, and that is a promise. But right now they are dealing with children who are not walking the walk. But what do? How can they feed in and work with their grandchildren to impart the love of God into them when their parents are not? How do they do that as grandparents?
Every situation is different. So there is no easy answer. However, you want to work, obviously, in cooperation with your children. You don't want to create negative atmospheres. And so it takes a lot of prayer. It takes a lot of, I think, God-given discernment on how to do that. Obviously, it creates challenges. That's one of the issues they're going to speak at this conference is,
Yes.
is how do you do that when your children are not living out their faith?
More and more, we are seeing grandparents raising their grandchildren as parents. One example of that was in the Olympics when we watched Simone Biles, and she did so awesome. Well, her grandparents had actually adopted her. She calls them mom and dad. But we're seeing that more and more. That kind of, first of all, doesn't that take kind of the fun away from being a grandparent? Because suddenly you have to be the disciplinarian, and all the fun of being a grandparent is that you do not have to be the disciplinarian. Your thoughts on that?
Chuck Swindoll, I don't know if you don't know his story or not, but he had a rather messy divorce in one of his children, and his grandchildren came and lived with him for a year. And so he spoke to that. And they had to be parents after they thought they were done being parents.
Yes.
They had children again in their home. And the interesting part in this conference is those children came and spoke to everyone.
My.
And it was unfiltered. Chuck Swindoll didn't know what they were going to say. But every one of them looked at their grandfather and their grandmother and said, "You made a difference in my life.
Oh, my. That's so great.
You did something that will change me forever, and that is that you cared enough to share your life with me in a way you didn't have to." And whether grandchildren live with us and move in, because that happens in a broken world with divorce and all sorts of things that take parenting away from their children. But even if we just give our lives in a way, because often I know I'm a grandfather, and I know that when your children leave your house, you think, "Hey, it's over with." And it's me time. It's time for me and my wife
to be selfish
to
again?
do some things and to be selfish. And that's who we are basically, is we're almost all selfish in one way or another. And so we fall into this selfish time of and we have to fight that. As grandparents, it's something that we have to be aware of, number one. And I don't think many grandparents are aware of that. Number two, we have to fight against that, saying, "God, where do you want me to pour into my grandchildren? How do you want me to do it?" And sometimes it's not easy to do that. I find myself, I work in a church, I'm a pastor, and yet sometimes I'm challenged. Okay, how do I take this 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 1-year-old and how do I share my faith? What are the things I can do? Because it's been a long time since I had a 1-year-old sitting on my lap.
Don't you find that they start so many conversations? They are so curious about the world and their place in it. Don't you find so many of those, they're almost leading the conversation, and then you get an opportunity to open up and share your faith with them in a very organic way?
If it's a priority.
Yes.
If it's not a priority to us, we don't share our faith.
But watching for those teachable moments always.
Absolutely.
The way that we used to with our children.
My 1-year-old granddaughter, her name is Juniper.
Oh, I love it.
And she has one word that she uses. You say anything to her and she says, "Why?"
Yes.
Well, talk about an opportunity.
That's right. Doors open.
So that's inexhaustible of the things that we can talk about why. But it is so much fun to be a grandparent. And after I went to the grandparenting conference, I came back a different person. Because it reminded me it's the quantity of time. It's the emphasis. It is getting rid of the selfishness that I have within me that wants to draw me to the things that I have made important since my kids have left, and it's been some years now.
You talk about the quantity of time. Another thing that is very different in our current culture is I think of Sundays after church. We always went to Grandma's and we had Sunday dinner together because everybody lived in the same town, and great memories. And of course, I had a wonderful bond with her. And I would say as well, a lot of who I am was that praying grandma, and how much that she poured into my life. But nowadays, there are a lot of kids, because of their jobs and the world in which we live, they've moved far. There's long distance grandparenting. Thank goodness for Skype and FaceTime. But how do you have quantity time when there are so many miles between you?
Well, you mentioned it. I know a lot of older folks who are resistant to technology.
Oh, don't.
Oh, yeah.
Because it can be used for such good.
And so I know that we have to, as older adults, change is hard for us, and yet if our priorities are information, communication, and we need to establish relationship with our children who are miles away, maybe across the country. My daughter now is in the Middle East. She's with the Navy.
Wow.
And so we have to use Skype. I hadn't used Skype before, but I learned how to use it, and it's not that hard.
It's not that hard.
And it's the only way we can communicate. So I will do anything it takes to be able to communicate with the ones that I love. So are we willing to go outside of our comfort zone to establish communication and this relationship with our grandchildren? That's especially more important as they get older. Now, teens and preteens, I've never Twittered. I don't know what Twitter is. I've never done it. I know that my time is coming.
Very easy.
But I know that it's coming, but
yeah, it is.
There is a little bit of resistance in me, but I know that I'm going to have to
just
give up.
So you know, it's not that you've never Twittered, you've never tweeted. The platform is Twitter.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So there
Yes.
you go.
Yes.
First lesson, and now you're on your way.
Yeah, I doubt it.
It'll be fine. So what about the old-fashioned way? What about letter writing with grandchildren?
Sometimes the older generation, I'm not a letter writer. I like to talk. I like to communicate. So we still have phones. Even though landlines are a thing of the past, we still have cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And so communication and as your kids get older, your cell phone is very accessible to them. They carry it all the time. And texting is very simple. My 90-year-old mom doesn't text, but she uses her cell phone. So, I'll take small victories.
That's exactly right. Well, texting might be a little difficult if your eyesight isn't what it once was. So,
Right.
Yes, the nice thing about cell phones is wherever they are, you can reach somebody. It's not like the old days where a phone could ring and ring and ring if they weren't home. If somebody's not home, you still get them.
And there are tools, and they're going to talk about distance grandparenting here in our conference. There are tools that we can utilize if we just, again, if it's not a priority, we won't do it. But if we make it a priority, then we will find however we can to accomplish the goal, which is establishing a relationship. So from that foundation, I can share into my kids, my grandchildren's lives.
I have another friend who basically says, I blew it my first time around as a parent. I was not the father I should have been. He now is given the opportunity to be father to his grandchildren, and he has said, I'm going to do it right this time. What at this conference would you have for someone like him?
I think for me, I can just speak for me. When I went to this conference, it was the fact that I need to make it a priority. Mm-hmm. And I can't lose sight of the fact that I have a responsibility, because it is a responsibility, because the Bible talk about it when you're going along the road, talk about it to your children, but it also talk about it to your children's children. And so we have a responsibility. Now, in our culture, the families are, I don't know, I can use the word silos because we are disconnected. In other cultures, the extended family all lives together. And so the grandparents have more of a say. We have more segregated our families. So I think, first of all, our churches have to rethink the definition of family.
Okay.
And not just think about the parents with their children, but also allowing and taking responsibility as uncles and aunts to raise as a tribe, as a family, extended family, to speak into the lives of other cultures. Do it better than we do, especially grandparents. And so, and I think part of it comes from the culture in which we live, this individualism, this rugged individualism, which our country was founded on. And then we fall into this selfishness, which so easily entangles us, especially in this culture of affluence, and we have so much, and those things become gods to us instead of the God who lives, and then he calls us into relationship with those who are the most important to us, which are our family.
So important. Grandparenting Matters conference coming up. We're talking with Paul Johnson. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.